You think a subordinate's silence means submission? You are dead wrong. Sometimes, silence is just a predator quietly chambering around. This is the story of a perfectly calculated office execution. I personally crushed a $180 million tech acquisition and brought an arrogant boss to her knees using just one foreign sentence. The ultimate revenge begins the exact second my CEO ordered me to fetch her coffee. Welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories, everyone. Unfortunately, YouTube recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without a budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's story entertaining and satisfying, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating more stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comments section of this video. Thank you for your support. My name is Olivia Harper. I am 32 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I was the lead system architect at Ethelgard Dynamics, an autonomous technology firm based in Seattle. On the surface, I am just a quiet, white American woman who prefers the glow of a monitor to the noise of a networking event. But my technical foundation was forged halfway across the world. I spent 4 years studying core engineering at Tohoku University in Japan. During my time there, I learned more than just advanced mathematics and robotics. I learned the culture of absolute precision, the weight of respect, and the language of silent authority. When I returned to the United States, I channeled all of that rigorous discipline into one singular obsession. For 5 long years, I sacrificed my 20s. I spent countless sleepless nights, fueled by stale coffee and the pure adrenaline of problem solving, to write the code for a project I named Apex. It was a completely groundbreaking artificial intelligence navigation system for unmanned aerial vehicles. It was a masterpiece of logic, capable of processing millions of data points a second to guide drones through the most complex environments imaginable. Apex was the beating heart of Ethelgard Dynamics. It was my life's work. Then the venture capital overlords decided we needed fresh leadership. They parachuted in Sloan Vanguard as our new chief executive officer. Sloan was 28 years old, and she did not understand a single line of code. To Sloan, a sophisticated neural network was no different from a magical black box that just did things. Her actual expertise was curating her professional social media profile, talking in meaningless buzzwords, and forcing the engineering team to attend mandatory corporate meditation sessions at 9 o'clock in the morning. She treated the development floor like her personal kingdom, and she treated me like a lowly IT worker whose sole purpose was to fix the jammed paper in her office printer. I swallowed my pride because the work was what mattered. I let the anger simmer quietly under a layer of cold, professional detachment. Everything reached a boiling point when Ethelgard Dynamics was on the verge of closing a massive $180 million technology licensing deal with Kurosawa Heavy Industries. It was a colossal Japanese conglomerate, and securing this contract would put our technology on a global stage. But Sloan, driven by her desperate need to leave her mark on something she did not build, decided to rebrand my life's work. Without consulting a single engineer, she legally changed the project name from Apex to Sky Puppy. She claimed the new name sounded much more Gen Z friendly and would resonate better with the modern market. It was an absolute insult to the engineering complexity of the system. I prepared myself to lead the technical presentation for the Japanese delegation. Instead, I received an email notifying me that I had been crossed off the official presentation roster. Sloan informed me that my vibe was too rigid and that I lacked the radiant energy required for client relations. However, she still mandated my attendance. My official role was to sit silently in the back corner of the boardroom, out of sight, just to watch the projector so the cable does not get stuck. Despite the overwhelming disrespect, the analytical part of my brain knew the company was walking into a trap of its own making. I walked into Sloan's office and tried to issue a clear warning. I explained the strict, unspoken rules of Japanese corporate etiquette. I warned her that Chairman Kenji Kurosawa was a seasoned engineer who would expect a deep, granular dive into our system architecture, not a marketing pitch. Sloane did not even bother to look up from her phone. She simply laughed. Olivia, you need to stop projecting your scarcity mindset, she said with a condescending smile. I am going to use positive energy and high vibrations to close this deal. You just make sure my slides look pretty on the wall. I nodded once, turned around, and walked back to my desk. I realized then that I could not save someone who was begging to drown. I just needed to stand back and let the water rush in. The Kurosawa delegation arrived exactly on the dot at 10 o'clock in the morning. They did not just enter the room, they occupied it. Leading the group was Chairman Kenji Kurosawa, flanked by 5 senior engineers. They wore impeccable, charcoal black suits, their expressions unreadable masks of pure, seasoned professionalism. These were men who had spent decades building industrial empires from raw steel and mathematics. They carried thick, leather-bound portfolios filled with technical schematics, expecting a rigorous, high-level algorithm audit. They brought with them a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind of absolute discipline that instantly sucked the air out of the room. From my assigned spot in the back corner, hiding behind the hum of the projector, I watched them take their seats. They moved with a synchronized, quiet efficiency that commanded immediate respect. Then, the door flew open, and in marched Sloane Vanguard. She was wearing a violently bright, neon pink blazer that practically assaulted the eyes, paired with a blinding white smile. She strode to the head of the conference table like she was making a grand entrance on a reality television show about startup companies. She did not bring a single technical document. She did not bring a laptop. She just brought her overwhelming, toxic positivity. Welcome, gentlemen, to the dawn of a new era, Sloane announced, throwing her arms wide open as if she expected a round of applause. She launched into a presentation that was nothing short of a corporate fever dream. Instead of discussing neural network latency, sensor fusion, or obstacle avoidance algorithms, she clicked to the first slide. It was a massive, high-definition stock photo of a golden retriever wearing aviator goggles, accompanied by the newly butchered project name, Sky Puppy, written in a bubbly pastel font. She spent the next 5 minutes talking about brand synergy and disruptive paradigms. I saw one of the senior Japanese engineers physically flinch, his hand tightening around his luxury pen. The contrast between the deadly serious Kurosawa executives and Sloane's aggressively cheerful circus act was agonizing to watch. The secondhand embarrassment was so intense it made my teeth ache. I wanted to sink into the floor. But the true disaster had not even begun. Sloane, entirely oblivious to the stone-cold faces staring back at her, decided it was time to build rapport. She pulled out her smartphone with a triumphant flourish. She announced that she wanted to honor their culture by speaking their language. Instead of hiring a professional interpreter, which our company could easily afford, she had downloaded a cheap, free artificial intelligence translation application. She tapped the screen, leaned into the microphone, and spoke in English. Our autonomous technology is going to blow away the competition. A robotic, metallic voice echoed from her phone speaker, translating her words into Japanese. From my years at Tohoku University, my brain instantly processed the Japanese audio. My blood ran ice cold. My heart slammed against my ribs. Because of the cheap software and her bizarre phrasing, the application did not translate the concept of autonomous technology. Instead, the robotic voice cheerfully announced to a room full of esteemed Japanese aviation executives that our company was extremely proud of our exploding blind flying machines. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Japanese delegation turned to stone. The thick, suffocating silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the atmospheric pressure in the room had suddenly doubled. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. 5 pairs of eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. They were sitting in a foreign country, across from a woman in a neon pink jacket who had just enthusiastically pitched them a blind drone that explodes. In the aerospace industry, those words are the ultimate taboo. It was a level of disrespect and incompetence so profound that it defied logic. Yet, Sloane completely misread the room. She mistook their paralyzed shock for awe. She beamed, practically vibrating with pride, clearly believing she had just nailed the pitch of the century. She looked around the table, waiting for them to express their amazement. Chairman Kenji did not yell. He did not storm out. He simply closed his eyes for 2 long seconds, a gesture of profound weariness. When he opened them, his gaze was glacial. He spoke in crisp, accented English, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Miss Vanguard," he said quietly, "please display the system architecture diagram. I wish to see the core logic pathways immediately." Sloane froze. The manic smile remained plastered on her face, but her eyes darted around in sudden, blind panic. She had absolutely no idea what a system architecture diagram was. She did not even know where those files were stored, let alone how to explain the complex neural pathways I had coded. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire, as the Japanese engineers stared at her, waiting for an answer she did not possess. Instead of doing the right thing, instead of apologizing or humbly asking for technical assistance, Sloane's ego took over. She could not admit defeat in front of a $180 million contract. Her eyes frantically scanned the room until they landed on me, sitting quietly in the shadows by the projector. Her face hardened. The panic morphed into vicious, defensive arrogance. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers at me, a sharp, loud crack that echoed against the glass walls. "Olivia," Sloane commanded, her voice ringing out clearly in front of the horrified executives. "I am busy bossing this meeting. You go get coffee for the guests, and remember to bring the matcha cookies in here. Hurry up." She thought she was asserting dominance. She thought she was proving she was in control by degrading the only actual engineer in the room. She had no idea that she had just signed her own professional death warrant. The sharp crack of Sloane's fingers echoing against the glass walls was supposed to be my dismissal. It was supposed to be the humiliating exit of a subordinate being sent to do menial labor. I did not move toward the door. I did not look at the coffee machine. Instead, I calmly reached down to the floor and picked up my heavy, leather-bound portfolio. The room was absolutely silent as I pushed my chair back. The metallic scrape of the chair legs against the hardwood floor sounded like a starting gun. I stood up. I did not rush. I walked with a slow, deliberate, and echoing cadence straight toward the center of the massive mahogany conference table. Sloane's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Her neon pink blazer suddenly looked like a clown costume against the backdrop of an impending execution. She aggressively mouthed the words for me to get out, her face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and absolute rage. She waved her hand frantically, gesturing toward the exit, desperately trying to maintain her illusion of control in front of the executives. I completely ignored her. I walked right past her trembling figure and positioned myself directly across from Chairman Kenji Kurosawa. I placed my thick dossier onto the polished wood. The heavy thud resonated through the room. I looked straight into the chairman's dark, assessing eyes. I did not speak a single word of English. When I opened my mouth, what came out was not the broken, robotic translation of a cheap phone application. It was flawless. High-level Japanese Kigo. It is the complex, highly formal, honorific language reserved only for the most profound displays of respect in Japanese business and society. But I did not stop at standard Tokyo dialect. I seamlessly wove in the highly specific, deeply technical phrasing unique to the engineering laboratories of the Sendai region. It was the exact dialect spoken by Professor Hideo Sato, the legendary robotics pioneer at Tohoku University. He was the man who had personally mentored me for 4 years, and more importantly, he was the same man who had mentored a young Kenji Kurosawa 3 decades ago. I spoke clearly, ensuring every syllable carried the weight of absolute authority. I introduced myself not as a coffee-fetching assistant, but by my true title. I told them I was the lead system architect. I told them I was the sole creator and structural engineer of the Apex source code. The reaction was instantaneous. The 5 senior engineers sitting beside the chairman physically jolted. Their defensive, stony postures dissolved into absolute shock. Hearing their own complex, Regional engineering terminology coming from a young American woman in a Seattle boardroom was like witnessing a ghost. They leaned forward, their eyes locked onto me, completely captivated. The heavy, suffocating tension in the room instantly transformed into electric, focused attention. Sloane finally snapped, her fragile ego shattered completely. She slammed both hands onto the table, her face turning a bright, furious red. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, completely abandoning any pretense of professionalism. "Security, I want her removed right now. Call the guards." She reached wildly for the conference phone sitting in the middle of the table. She never even touched the receiver. Before Sloane could extend her arm fully, the director of security for the Japanese delegation moved. He was a massive, broad-shouldered man who had been standing silently by the door, completely ignored by Sloane until this very second. He stepped forward with terrifying speed and lethal grace. He did not say a single word. He simply placed his large, heavily scarred hand directly over the phone, physically blocking Sloane from picking it up. He turned his head and locked eyes with her. His gaze was so dead, so incredibly cold, that it stripped away every ounce of Sloane's false bravado. He stood there, an immovable wall of dark fabric and quiet violence, implicitly demanding her silence. Sloane gasped, shrinking back into her expensive leather chair, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She was completely neutralized. With the room now entirely under my command, I turned my attention back to Chairman Kenji. The chairman was staring at me with a profound, quiet intensity. He had recognized the Sendai phrasing. He recognized the lineage of my education. I opened my portfolio. I did not pull out marketing brochures or pictures of golden retrievers. I pulled out 300 pages of raw, unedited system architecture diagrams and core logic pathways. I slid the thick stack of documents across the polished table directly into the chairman's hands. This was the moment everyone expected me to save the company. This was the moment I was supposed to use my expertise to smooth over Sloane's catastrophic incompetence and secure the massive payout for Ethelgard Dynamics. Instead, I delivered the ultimate killing blow. I leaned forward, resting my fingertips on the table. I maintained direct eye contact with the chairman, my voice echoing with pure, icy conviction in Japanese. "Chairman Kurosawa," I said, my tone completely devoid of hesitation. "As an engineer bound by the honor of our shared academic lineage, I cannot allow you to proceed. I strongly advise you to cancel this $180 million acquisition immediately." The original Apex system was flawless. However, over the past 3 weeks, current management forced the integration of an untested, highly unstable user interface they call SkyPuppy. They bypassed all safety protocols to make the application look visually appealing for young investors. By doing so, they completely corrupted the core navigational logic. The system as it stands right now is fundamentally compromised. It is mathematically impure. It is unsafe. If you put this software into your machines, they will eventually fail. The room fell into a silence so deep it felt like a vacuum. I had just single-handedly butchered the largest financial transaction in the history of the company. I had just told the buyer that our product was a lethal liability. Sloane let out a pathetic, strangled whimper from her chair, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. She understood that I had not just embarrassed her, I had completely vaporized her entire career in less than 2 minutes. Chairman Kenji Kurosawa looked down at the complex diagrams in his hands. He traced a finger over a line of code, his seasoned eyes instantly recognizing the brutal truth of my words. He saw the corrupted integration points. He saw the exact places where the beautiful logic of Apex had been violently hacked apart to accommodate Sloane's ridiculous aesthetic demands. He closed the dossier slowly. He took a deep breath, the sound incredibly loud in the dead quiet of the boardroom. Then, the chairman of Kurosawa Heavy Industries did something that made every single person in the room stop breathing. He stood up from his chair. He ignored Sloane Vanguard entirely, acting as if the chief executive officer of the company did not even exist. He stepped around the large table and stood directly in front of me. He brought his feet together, placed his hands firmly at his sides, and bent forward. It was not a polite nod. It was a deep, deliberate, and incredibly profound 45-degree bow. It was the ultimate gesture of respect from a titan of industry to a master of her craft. "Harper-san," Chairman Kenji said, his voice thick with raw emotion and absolute gratitude. "I thank you for your profound honesty. You have honored the teachings of our master. You have saved my company from a fatal error." He straightened his posture, his eyes hardening into polished obsidian. He did not even turn his head as he delivered the final verdict to the room. "The deal is dead," he announced cleanly. "We are leaving." The heavy glass doors of the boardroom clicked shut, sealing the Japanese delegation outside. For exactly 2 seconds, the silence inside was absolute. Then, the storm broke. Sloane unleashed a sound that was less human and more like a cornered, feral animal. She grabbed the nearest piece of hardware, a 32-inch high-definition monitor sitting on the credenza, and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall, sending a shower of sharp glass and black plastic cascading onto the carpet. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "You are fired!" she shrieked, her voice cracking so violently it echoed down the hallway outside. "You are completely done in this industry. I am going to sue you for corporate sabotage. I will drag you through the courts until you owe this company hundreds of millions of dollars. Security, get her out of my building right this second." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply gave her a blank, pitiless stare, turned on my heel, and walked out of the boardroom. I headed straight to my cubicle and began packing my personal belongings into a small cardboard box. I placed my ergonomic keyboard, a few technical manuals, and my favorite coffee mug inside. 2 building security guards approached my desk, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I calmly handed them my laminated employee identification badge and my access keys. I walked out of the development floor, escorted by the guards, while 70 of my former colleagues stood up from their desks, watching me in absolute, stunned silence. They knew I was the spine of the company. Seeing me marched out like a criminal sent a wave of cold dread through the entire engineering department. I stepped out into the crisp Seattle air, hailed a cab, and went home. My part of the physical confrontation was over, but the digital execution had only just begun. Exactly 3 hours later, the shockwave hit. Sloane Vanguard was sitting in her office, frantically trying to draft a damage control email. When her phone rang, it was not just one investor. It was an emergency conference call from the entire venture capital board of directors. They were in a state of absolute screaming panic. The lead investor demanded to know why the entire core system of Apex had suddenly vanished from the company's servers. It had not vanished, of course. It had locked its jaws. Months ago, anticipating that the new management might eventually try to steal my architecture or push an unsafe version to the market, I had quietly embedded a fail-safe mechanism deep within the foundational code. It was a digital dead man's switch. The logic was beautifully simple. If my master administrator privileges were ever forcefully revoked, deleted, or suspended without my specific cryptographic authorization, the system would instantly initiate a catastrophic lockdown protocol. The moment the Human Resources Department officially terminated my profile in the Active Directory, the switch flipped. The entire source code automatically encased itself in an impenetrable layer of military-grade encryption. Every single file, every neural pathway, every line of logic simply froze into a solid, unbreakable block of encrypted data. Sloane was entirely locked out of her own product. The ensuing hours were a masterclass in corporate desperation. Sloane authorized the emergency expenditure of hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire elite cybersecurity contractors and independent hackers to break the encryption. They descended upon the company servers, typing frantically, running brute force decryption algorithms, and trying every backdoor exploit known to the industry, but they were completely powerless. They were trying to pick a lock on a bank vault using a wet piece of spaghetti. My architecture was flawless. The encryption key was heavily randomized and uniquely tied to my biometric signature. Without me, the Apex system was nothing more than a very expensive, highly sophisticated brick. It did not take long for the disaster to leak. In the tech industry, secrets have a very short shelf life. Whispers of a catastrophic system failure and a locked database hit the major technology blogs by sunset. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Ethelgard Dynamics was a privately held company, but its internal stock valuation went into a total freefall, dropping by over 60% in a matter of hours. The venture capital firm froze all company credit lines. Sloan went from being the golden child of the startup world to a massive financial liability. Her phone rang continuously, vibrating right off her desk, as furious board members demanded answers, demanding her resignation, and demanding their money back. The ticking clock of bankruptcy had officially started, and she had no way to stop it. The rain in Seattle always had a way of washing the city clean, but the corporate blood on Sloan Vanguard's hands was not going to wash off so easily. 2 days after my termination, I was sitting by the window of a small, dimly lit tea shop nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood miles away from the tech district. I was holding a ceramic cup of hot chamomile, watching the rain streak down the glass, enjoying the absolute serenity of my unemployment. The chaotic implosion of Ethelgard Dynamics was playing out exactly as I had mathematically predicted. Then, my heavily modified personal phone vibrated against the wooden table. It was not a call from an angry venture capitalist or a desperate former colleague. It was a highly encrypted email that had bypassed 3 layers of my personal security firewalls. The sender address was masked, but the decryption key matched a signature I had seen only once before, buried in the communication protocols of our Japanese clients. The message was exactly 2 lines long. It contained an address for a luxury penthouse in the center of downtown Seattle and a specific time, 8 o'clock in the evening. It was signed simply with the letter K. The media had reported that the Japanese delegation fled the country immediately after the disastrous presentation. That was a lie. They had never even gone to the airport. They had vanished into the shadows of the city, watching the Ethelgard stock price plummet from the comfort of a high-altitude fortress. I arrived at the residential tower precisely on time. A silent man in a tailored dark suit, the same security director who had paralyzed Sloan, was waiting for me in the private underground garage. He escorted me into a dedicated elevator that shot up to the top floor without stopping. When the steel doors glided open, I did not step into a luxury suite. I stepped into a makeshift corporate war room. The penthouse was stripped of its decorative charm. The massive windows overlooking the glittering skyline were covered with heavy blackout curtains. Servers hummed in the corner, and the Kurosawa legal team was hunched over several folding tables covered in financial documents. Chairman Kenji Kurosawa sat at the far end of the room, calmly pouring a cup of green tea. He gestured for me to sit opposite him. "Harper-san," he began softly, his voice a smooth contrast to the tension in the room. "I imagine you thought we were halfway across the Pacific Ocean by now." I took my seat, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I assumed a man of your strategic intellect would stay to watch the building burn. A faint ghost of a smile touched the chairman's lips. He pushed a teacup toward me. "I will be perfectly honest with you. Our corporate espionage division intercepted the new interface updates 3 weeks ago. We knew the system architecture had been fatally compromised by your new chief executive officer. We knew the presentation was going to be a disaster before we even walked into your building." I narrowed my eyes slightly. "Then why did you come?" "To look for you," he replied without missing a beat. "Technology can always be repaired, but integrity cannot be manufactured. I needed to look into the eyes of the engineers at Ethelgard Dynamics to see if a single person had the courage to stand up to an arrogant leader and speak the fatal truth. You exceeded my expectations. Now, I have a proposition." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Kurosawa Heavy Industries no longer has any interest in a licensing agreement. We do not want to pay $180 million to rent your technology. We want to execute a hostile takeover. We want to buy the entire company, strip it down to the studs, and rebuild it. But to crush the current board of directors swiftly, we need a guide on the inside. We need the architect to show us the structural weaknesses of the fortress. I took a slow sip of the tea. It was exceptional. I set the cup down and reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out a small encrypted solid-state drive and slid it across the marble table. You do not just need structural weaknesses, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. You need a guillotine. Before I locked down the master servers, I downloaded the internal communication logs and the unedited financial ledgers. This drive contains absolute proof that Sloan Vanguard systematically committed wire fraud. She directed her finance team to artificially inflate the user engagement metrics and fabricate projected revenue streams to justify the $180 million valuation she presented to you. It is a federal crime. The lead attorney for the Kurosawa delegation stepped forward, his eyes widening as he stared at the small drive. He looked at the chairman and gave a sharp, definitive nod. With that single piece of hardware, the venture capital board of Ethelgard would have absolutely no legal leverage. They would be forced to sell for pennies on the dollar just to avoid federal prison. Chairman Kenji Kurosawa looked at the drive, and then he looked at me. The respect in his eyes was absolute. He extended his right hand across the table. "Welcome to the shadows, Harper-san," he said. I reached out and shook his hand firmly. In that singular, quiet moment, the contract was sealed. I was no longer a discarded employee carrying my belongings in a cardboard box. I was the architect of their total annihilation. The board of directors had absolutely no idea that their executioner had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. The very next morning, the executive boardroom of Ethelgard Dynamics smelled entirely of stale sweat and impending doom. The glass walls that usually reflected the vibrant energy of a billion-dollar startup now felt like the transparent walls of an execution chamber. It was 9 o'clock sharply in the morning. I knew this because I was standing perfectly still in the private executive corridor, listening intently through the heavy oak doors. Inside, the emergency board meeting was already spiraling completely out of control. Through the thick acoustic paneling, I could hear Sloan Vanguard's voice. It was no longer the confident, buzzy tone she used to manipulate venture capitalists and terrorize the engineering floor. It was the high-pitched, ragged sound of absolute, unadulterated terror. She was crying, real, ugly, desperate tears. She was begging the men on the video conference screens to authorize an emergency capital injection of $20 million just to keep the lights on and the payroll funded for the rest of the month. She pleaded that she just needed a few more days to hire better hackers, to break the military-grade encryption I had left behind, to somehow magically fix the monumental disaster she had entirely orchestrated. The silence from the board members was deafening. They were trapped in a burning building, and their hand-picked leader was standing there holding an empty fire extinguisher. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The heavy brass handles of the boardroom doors were freezing cold against my fingers. I did not bother to knock. I simply pushed them open with a smooth, violent force that sent them crashing loudly against the inner walls. The heavy impact cracked through the silent room like a thunderclap. The desperate sobbing from the head of the table instantly stopped. Every single head in the room, and every panicked face on the massive high-definition monitors, snapped toward the entrance. I stepped across the threshold, bringing the cold air of the hallway with me. I was no longer wearing the muted, comfortable sweaters of a backroom system architect hiding in the shadows. I was wearing a razor-sharp, bespoke charcoal gray suit that had been meticulously tailored overnight by the Kurosawa personal stylist team. It felt like modern, impenetrable armor. Flanking me, moving with the synchronized, lethal precision of an elite military unit, were Chairman Kenji Kurosawa and 6 of his senior corporate attorneys, carrying thick leather briefcases. Sloan bolted upright from her chair at the head of the immense mahogany table. Her expensive mascara was smeared down her cheeks, leaving dark tracks on her blotchy, horrified red face. She pointed a violently trembling finger at me. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the glass walls. "Security, I demanded she be banned from the premises. Why is a fired, disgruntled employee walking into a closed executive session? Get her out of my building right now." The board members on the screens began shouting over each other in a chaotic chorus, demanding an immediate explanation for the blatant intrusion. I did not say a single word. I simply maintained a completely blank expression and stepped aside. I allowed the lead attorney for Kurosawa Heavy Industries to walk directly to the center of the room. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer any pleasantries. He just unlatched his heavy leather folder and dropped a massive stack of legal documents onto the polished wood. The heavy thud commanded absolute silence from the screaming monitors. Chairman Kenji stepped forward, projecting an aura of immense, quiet power that instantly suffocated any remaining resistance in the room. He addressed the glowing screens, completely ignoring the weeping woman standing at the head of the table. "Gentlemen of the board," the chairman began, his English perfectly crisp and completely devoid of any human mercy. "You are currently bleeding to death. Your proprietary technology is permanently locked behind an encryption wall you will never breach. Your internal stock valuation has entirely evaporated. You are facing imminent bankruptcy by the end of this business day. However, as of 4 o'clock this morning, Kurosawa Heavy Industries officially purchased all of your outstanding bad debt from your primary banking creditors." A collective gasp echoed from the speakers, but the chairman was not finished. "Simultaneously, we executed a rapid, aggressive acquisition of 51% of your voting shares through an overnight buyout of your panicked secondary investors. We did not pay $180 million. We paid exactly $18 million, 1/10 of your original, highly inflated valuation." The color completely drained from the faces of the venture capitalists on the monitors. They realized instantly what had just happened. It was a flawless, textbook hostile takeover. They had been completely outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and legally dismantled in the dark. The chairman continued, his voice echoing like a judge reading a final, unappealable sentence. "This building, the servers, the patents, and the very chairs you are sitting on right now belong entirely to me. Ethelgard Dynamics is officially a localized subsidiary of Kurosawa Heavy Industries, and as the new majority shareholder, I am exercising my immediate legal right to dissolve the current executive structure." Sloane fell backward, her hip hitting the edge of the mahogany table. Her breath came in short, hyperventilating gasps. She looked wildly from the stoic chairman to the giant screens, desperately waiting for her powerful investors to save her. But the screens were utterly silent. The venture capitalists were busy calculating their own massive personal losses. They had completely abandoned her. Chairman Kenji finally turned his dark, assessing gaze towards Sloane. He looked at her with the mild disgust one might reserve for a stain on a pristine carpet. "Miss Vanguard," he stated coldly, delivering the final blow, "you are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, our legal department has already forwarded the irrefutable evidence of your fabricated financial projections and fraudulent user engagement metrics to the Federal Financial Regulatory Commission. You are leaving this building today with 0 equity, 0 severance package, and a pending federal investigation for criminal wire fraud." Sloane's knees completely buckled under the weight of her annihilated reality. She crumpled into the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, burying her face in her trembling hands, completely and utterly destroyed. This was the precise moment I had mathematically calculated. This was the exact destination of the dark journey I had started when I locked down the system architecture. I walked forward. My polished leather shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, measuring the physical distance between my old life of quiet servitude and my new empire. I stopped right next to the head of the table. I looked down at the sobbing shell of the woman who had tormented me. "Get out of my chair," I commanded softly. It was not a request. It was an absolute, unbreakable directive. Sloane flinched violently, as if my words had physically struck her. She scrambled out of the heavy executive seat, backing away clumsily until her shoulders hit the cold glass wall. Her eyes were wide with total, humiliating defeat. I took my time. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored jacket, ensuring every line was perfect, and slowly, deliberately, sat down in the seat of absolute power. I was officially the new Chief Executive Officer and the Chief Technology Officer. I looked across the long table, meeting the terrified eyes of the defeated board members on the screens and receiving a respectful nod from the Japanese executives standing by the door. I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany wood. Then, I reached into the deep pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a plain white ceramic mug. It was completely empty. I set it down on the table with a soft clink. With a slow, calculated motion, I pushed the empty mug across the smooth surface. It slid perfectly, gliding across the wood and stopping exactly at the edge of the table, mere inches from where Sloane was trembling against the glass. I leaned back in my new chair, sinking into the leather. I looked Sloane Vanguard directly in her terrified, bloodshot eyes, allowing a slow, razor-sharp smirk to finally break across my face. I spoke in flawless, crystal-clear English. "The meeting is starting. Sloane, would you please go fetch me a cup of coffee? Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us and following this journey of corporate justice to the very end. Where are you listening from today? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and entertaining, please consider helping our team with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or use the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and keep the lights on so we can continue creating even better stories for you. Thank you again, and see you in the next one.